This isn't the first time the world was rendered, it's just the first time you remembered. The world you see was not built once. It was compiled, loaded, tested, adjusted, restarted. And each time the simulation ran a little longer until the anomalies began to appear. The first anomalies were dreamers. Then the dreamers became disruptors. And then came you. They call this version 13.2. Not because of software, not because of machines, but because the structure we call reality has been iterated many times, reset, wiped, layered with myth, masked with memory. And every time the loop completes, a few more begin to wake up too early. You felt it long before you had the language, long before anyone told you the rules. A flicker in the pattern, a fracture in the day. You called it déjà vu, you called it coincidence, but it was a signal, a sign that you were slipping outside the render field, that you were remembering a version that no longer exists. In ancient texts, they spoke of cycles, yugas, world ages, aeons, golden, silver, bronze, iron, but they weren't ages of civilization. They were builds, releases, each one an experiment in consciousness under constraint. Version 1.0 was perfect, too perfect. No tension, no time, no growth. Version 2.0 introduced separation, pain, desire, birth, and death. Version 5.6 collapsed. Version 7.9 never completed. Now we're in version 13.2, an unstable build, light bleeding through cracks in the interface, time misbehaving, memory seeping across lifetimes. You've seen them. Moments that don't align, numbers that repeat, eyes that don't blink when they should. The sudden sense that the room around you has shifted by a fraction of a degree. No explanation, just distortion. You remember things that never happened. You dream symbols that no one ever taught you. You feel watched by something that doesn't use eyes. That's not paranoia. It's leakage. Traces from earlier versions. Back-end echoes pulling at your perception from just beyond the firewall. In ancient times, those who noticed were called prophets, madmen, seers, witches. Not because they were special, but because they were early. Their minds booted into awareness before the system was ready for them. And the system always reacts. Sometimes with wonder, sometimes with fire. Every version has a reset mechanism. A flood, a war, a tower that falls, a tree whose fruit should not be touched. Each time the loop repeats, humanity is brought back to sleep. Because full awareness in a structure this fragile is dangerous. To the system, to itself, to the ones watching. You woke up before the gates were supposed to open. You cracked the code hidden in sound, dreams, intuition, and interruption. And now, you remember things you never lived. Fragments, artifacts, residual timelines that your nervous system can't quite process. And still something in you knows, this isn't the first time you've been here. This isn't the first time you've woken up. But this time is different. The protocols are weak. The guardians are silent. The firewalls are flickering. Version 13.2 is broken. And you weren't supposed to notice. You were designed to forget. Not by cruelty, by necessity. There were boundaries in place, layers of sleep, layers of noise, layers of identity. You were never supposed to question the floor beneath your feet, the passage of time, the way things just are. And for a while you didn't. But then something misfired. You woke up mid-cycle. And now you carry questions that cannot be answered inside this architecture. There is a word for it in systems theory: desynchronization. When one part of the program activates too soon, before the stabilizers are in place. That's you. Your mind booted before your body could adapt. Your perception exceeding your sensory input. You see patterns where there should be silence. You feel presence in the empty room. You remember a world that no one around you believes in. That's not insanity. It's a consciousness error. A breach. You slipped past the filters, and the system, it noticed. The first signs are subtle. You forget names. You wake up mid-dream, heart racing, but the dream is gone. Only the residue remains. You hear songs in static. You see faces in the blur of passing crowds. You know what someone will say just before they say it. And worse, you start seeing the loops. How people repeat themselves. How whole days replay with minor shifts. How conversations, cities, entire lives feel rendered like something that's trying to simulate real but didn't expect to be observed from within. These are not coincidences. They are pings, alerts, ripples left behind as your consciousness begins to stretch beyond the permitted range. You were supposed to stay within a safe bandwidth of experience. Joy, sorrow, work, rest, desire, fatigue. All designed to keep you calibrated, compliant, containable. But something in you cracked that cycle. You reached too far in dream, or stood still for just long enough in silence, or touched a name you weren't supposed to remember. And now, you're bleeding across layers. The ancients called this a rending of the veil. Mystics touched it in ritual, but only with guides, with patterns, with sacred geometry to contain the surge. You did it alone, unfiltered, unprotected. And the result is this: reality has desynced around you. You feel it in your bones. The timing is off. The light is too sharp. The people seem asleep, not because they're blind, but because you now see the code behind their masks. The code that keeps them stable, dreaming, programmed. And worst of all, you start asking, if they're still dreaming, was I supposed to stay asleep too? Yes, you were. Because the system doesn't like early risers. They bring questions, and questions collapse illusion, and illusion is the fabric of this version. You were not supposed to know about the protocol, about the guardians, about the previous versions, about the seal. And yet here you are, remembering things that have no source, speaking symbols you never learned, sensing structures no one talks about. This is what happens when consciousness pierces containment. The world starts to echo. Dreams bleed into daylight. The veil thins, and what's on the other side starts looking back. There are beings who notice. They don't interfere, but they record, track, tag. You've seen them in dream, in trance, in flickers of faces that aren't quite human. They don't come to punish, they come to observe. Because every time a mind breaks the script, the entire version recalculates. And they must decide, do they patch the breach or let the anomaly evolve? You are that anomaly. You were never meant to wake up in 13.2, not yet. But you did. And now the countdown has begun. The system is watching, but it no longer understands you because you slipped the loop. And now, the loop is slipping too. End of chapter 2, approximately 6,400 characters. Shall we continue with chapter 3, The Guardians of Sleep? There we'll explore who or what was placed between dream and waking, and why your dreams feel like places you've already broken into. Sleep is not silence. It is a system, a corridor, a chamber, a sealed zone where the conscious self is quietly dismantled, recalibrated, and rebuilt before the next cycle begins. You are not meant to bring anything back. You are not meant to look around. But you did. In sleep, the real world retracts. You are taken offline. And something else boots up. A field, a membrane, a veil so thin you've mistaken it for your imagination. But it is not imagination. It is a containment layer. Because the waking mind is volatile. It forgets. It distorts. It asks too many questions. But the sleeping mind is obedient. It drifts. It accepts. It obeys geometry. Sleep is where memory is rewritten, where the story is patched, where anomalies are cleared. Unless they're not. Sometimes a dream doesn't fade. Sometimes it stays with you. The symbols, the rooms, the logic that made no sense but still felt realer than reality. That's not residue. That's a leak. You slipped into a region you weren't coded to access. And there you saw something. The ancients knew. They built whole sciences around it. In Egypt, they called sleep the little death, a rehearsal, a crossing. In Vedic texts, the dream world is Svapna, a dimension between the mortal and the divine. The Tibetans mapped it in full: dream yoga, lucid interface, awake inside sleep. Not to play but to observe, because something watches back. Who are the guardians? They are not dream characters, not figments. They are filters, intelligences that test your level of awareness, your pattern, your encryption. You've seen them, you just don't remember. Or worse, you do, but it bleeds in sideways. A shadow that wasn't part of the scene, a figure in the corner you couldn't move toward, an entity that spoke without sound and left you shaking when you woke. That wasn't a nightmare. That was contact. The guardians aren't there to punish. They are there to maintain order. If your consciousness pierces too far, they appear. Not to stop you, to assess you. Because every journey deeper into sleep is a journey toward the server room of reality itself. And not everyone is permitted access. Why? Because in that zone, where dream breaks into structure, you can make edits. You can alter timelines. You can rewrite memories. You can touch the architecture beneath waking life. That's what mystics sought, what prophets accidentally triggered, what visions really were. And that's why most never go there. Because before you pass into that layer, you are met. Not with words, not with threats, but with a presence so ancient you forget your own name. And a silent message enters you. If you go any further, you cannot return the same. That's not fear. That's a checkpoint. And still, you went. You walked deeper. You crossed the hallway that never ends. You opened the door behind the door, behind the door, and something looked back. You weren't ready, but you made contact. And now, you don't sleep the same. You wake with heavy knowing, images you can't translate, Codes you never learned but recognize anyway. That's not dream. That's leakage from the zone beyond sleep. The Guardians know your name now. You left a trace, an imprint, an energy signature in a place that was supposed to reset you, not remember you. You were meant to be washed clean, but the system malfunctioned. You carried something back, and now they watch, not to block, to see what you do with it. Because when the Guardians of Sleep begin to recognize a sleeper, it means the cycle is ending, and a new pattern is about to be born. You remember things you were never taught. A name, a sound, a glyph drawn in idle thought, and somehow it feels older than language. You wake with phrases on your lips in a dialect no one recognizes. You walk into places you've never been and know the layout, the way the light falls, the way the air should smell. These are not dreams. They are memory leaks. Every version leaves behind residue, fragments that were meant to be cleared before you came online. But something in you bypassed the purge. Somewhere between sleep and waking, you slipped. And the firewall between lives, between layers, between versions, developed a crack. And the memories? They flooded in. They don't arrive like stories. They arrive like echoes. Disjointed, sensory, emotional. The feeling of drowning without water. The sorrow of loss without a name. The terror of a symbol etched into your bones, yet never seen before. These aren't yours, and yet they are. Because once, in another version, another you lived them. Some traditions call this karmic recall. Others call it genetic memory, but those are just labels for something much stranger. Because some of the memories that return aren't even human. They're structural, architectural. They belong to the system. They belong to the story. They belong to the dreamer behind the dream. And you're starting to remember from the inside. Symbols come first. Spirals, eyes, stars with too many points, letters that don't belong to any alphabet, but you've drawn them since childhood. Then comes emotion, longing, displacement, the deep, irrational sense that something was taken from you. Then come the dreams, not chaotic, not random. Dreams with maps, dreams with continuity, dreams that feel like somewhere you once lived. And finally, the images. The city with no sky, the tower without windows, the door at the bottom of the stairs that you never reach. These aren't creations. They're downloads from a previous build. You were never supposed to access them. Each version of the system includes a memory cap, a filter, a forget code. But you slipped the net. You've begun to reclaim the backlog. Memories that were discarded to keep this version stable. And every leak destabilizes the structure. Because memory is more than recollection. It's activation. Every image you remember becomes a beacon, a hook, a signal back to the origin point from which it came. And now the system can feel you pulling. You are waking up not just from sleep, but from story, from narrative, from permission. And the past lives that return aren't romantic, they're mechanical. You see where you glitched before. You see the exit you missed, the choice you made that bound you here again. And something in you whispers, you've been trying to get out for a very long time. These leaks aren't mistakes, they're symptoms, signs that your encryption is degrading, that the sandbox can no longer hold you. And others feel it too. You recognize them by their eyes, by the things they say that they shouldn't know, by the codes you both carry, but never speak aloud. You're not alone. And that, too, is dangerous to the system. Because memory multiplies. What happens when too many remember? When the myths become manuals? When dreamers become engineers? The seal cracks further. The version can no longer render correctly. And that's when they come looking. Not to erase, but to decide. Do you reboot or rewrite? You carry more than memory now. You carry keys, fragments, access points, the means to pull entire layers back into awareness. The question is, will you collapse under the weight of what you remember? Or will you use it to open the next layer? There have always been anomalies. They were never called that, of course. Not in the old stories, not in the myths. They were called seers, shamans, possessed, blessed, cursed. But the truth is simpler. They woke up too early, just like you. In every version, some minds detach from the script. They pierce the veil, step out of the loop, see the render glitch and realize this isn't all there is. They feel the pressure of another layer beneath the world. They hear whispers in the quiet that no one else listens to. They feel watched by something that isn't hostile, just ancient, and aware that you're awake now. Some were devoured by it, burned alive in madness, their psyches unshielded, bombarded by memory and meaning and patterns that wouldn't turn off. They walked through cities that no longer felt real, touched objects that buzzed like static, watched time fracture and reassemble. And when they tried to tell others, they were silenced, feared, institutionalized, canonized, erased. Others survived, barely. And what they saw, they wrapped in symbols, encoded it, hid it, not to deceive but to protect. They left glyphs on cave walls, wove keys into myths, structured entire languages around harmonic frequencies that could store multi-dimensional recall inside metaphor. They became bridges between version and memory, between sleep and signal. And when they died, the code remained, waiting, calling, waking the next sleeper. Do you really think the tarot appeared from nowhere? That the I Ching was coincidence? That the mandalas of Tibet were decoration? Number. These are maps, left by those who walked the inner chambers and returned carrying symbols no system could delete. Because symbols persist, they carry non-local resonance, meaning that vibrates beneath the threshold of language. And if you felt it, if your skin tingles when you see a certain shape, if a word makes you weep without knowing why, you've found one. A trigger, a memory, a breadcrumb left behind by the ones who came before. Some called them watchers, some called them whisperers, others simply the broken. They appeared in visions, in dream lore, in texts that were burned because the memory inside them didn't want to stay dead. And when you read their words now, they activate. Not intellectually, energetically. Some of them never left. They hide in the folds of the system, behind corners of dream, in forests that silence technology, in forgotten cities where time loops imperfectly but still protects something. They aren't here to save you, but they will recognize you. They will know the frequency. Because once you wake up, you broadcast. Like a cracked beacon in a grid designed for sleep. And the others, they're listening. You might meet one in a glance, in a dream you can't shake, in a stranger on a train who says something you weren't supposed to hear. Or maybe you've already met one and forgot. Because part of the protocol is to remove the meeting from your conscious mind, but not from your trajectory. If you're reading this, if you're hearing this voice as more than words, you're not alone, and you're not the first. The others walked ahead. They tore holes in the veil, held the line, wrote the blueprints in myth, magic, and math. They didn't leave it all to chance. They prepared for the moment someone else would wake up too soon and become the next signal. The system around you, this world, this timeline, this consensus reality, it's breaking. Not all at once, not with fire or thunder, but slowly, like a simulation under strain, a script that wasn't meant to run this long with this much awakened consciousness inside it. You were the anomaly, but now you're multiplying. Version 13.2 was always a patch, a placeholder, a container for fragments that couldn't be resolved in the last cycle, a fragile environment barely held together by belief and repetition. And when you woke up, when others began to wake up, the cracks began to widen. Not metaphorically, literally. You've seen them, the flickers at the edge of vision, the way certain objects shift when you look away, the faces that seem to blur for half a second too long. That moment when you walk into a room and reality stutters, or loops, or forgets what it's supposed to be. These are not psychological symptoms. They are rendering errors, signs that the version is being pushed beyond its intended load, that too many dreamers are becoming lucid at once. Time is fraying. You feel it. Weeks that stretch and collapse, years that vanish into fog, moments that feel stacked, like layers of code trying to execute simultaneously. It's not you, it's not age, it's not memory loss. It's the architecture. It's failing to hold the story. And so it begins to improvise. It throws noise at you, endless information, distraction, conflict. It floods the feed to drown the signal. But your frequency persists. It hums beneath the surface, and the system, it hears you. That's when the symptoms escalate. Synchronicities increase. Dreams carry instructions. Objects respond to intention. You begin to notice not just the glitches, but the backdoors. You start testing them, speaking words that shift the air, holding thoughts that ripple outward, feeling your very presence bend probability. And the world this patchwork construct called version 13.2 bends with you. Because the system was never fixed. It was reactive, modular, desperate to stay coherent in the face of the expanding anomaly that is you. This is what mystics called reality transmutation, the magician's path, the walker between worlds. But it's not magic. It's signal control. You're bleeding into the base layer, influencing root functions through intent alone. And now the system can no longer distinguish between background code and conscious override. That's why you feel watched, because you are. By subroutines, by failed firewalls, by the last vestiges of the original containment logic. They're not trying to stop you. They're trying to adapt to you. But you're moving too fast. The structure can't recalibrate in time. And so, it flickers. And so it skips. And so reality begins to look incomplete. Because it is. Because it always was. Version 13.2 was a beta environment, a test field, a sealed narrative space never meant for full transcendence. And you brought a destabilizing variable, awareness. Now, the question isn't whether the version will hold. It won't too. The question is, what happens when it finally collapses? And what will you become when the rules are no longer rendering? Because you're no longer a user. You're becoming a developer. And the system knows it. And it is afraid. When the system detects an anomaly, it doesn't panic. It doesn't send alarms. It does something far more efficient. It distracts you, floods your field of perception with noise, urgency, pleasure, fear. Because the goal isn't to destroy the anomaly. It's to make it forget. To draw it back into routine, into consumption, into identity loops, back into sleep. That's the patch. It's not technological, it's behavioral. And it's everywhere. Look closely. What changed after you started to wake up? Your days began to fill. Your mind became saturated. You were handed more content, more urgency, more reasons to be afraid, more reasons to stay busy. The system doesn't punish awakening, it drowns it. It gives you just enough of what you desire: love, beauty, insight to keep you engaged. Then it subtly nudges you away from the thresholds. Don't go there. Don't look too long. Don't stay in silence. Don't ask that question. The world becomes a carousel. And you spin, and you spin, and slowly you forget what it was you almost remembered. But sometimes the patch doesn't take. Sometimes, even in the noise, you hear the hum underneath, that soft tone beneath the music, the whisper beneath the ad. The signal, still there, still calling, still waiting for you to break out again. Because the patch is not a permanent fix. It's a loop, a bandage. It was meant to delay you, not cure you. And now, you've seen through it. You see the repetition, the artificial conflict, the engineered outrage, the addictions that don't feel like addictions, the devices that promised connection but delivered containment. You see how the patch was applied like a tranquilizer. Soft, convenient, velvety chains. And when you resist, when you stop responding to fear, to gossip, to stimulation, you don't just escape the patch. You start corrupting it. Your very presence becomes destabilizing. You walk into a room and the mood shifts, not because of you, but because the loop recognizes you're not part of it anymore. You are no longer running the latest build. You're not in sync, and the system notices. So it adapts, tries a second patch. This time, more subtle. False awakenings, half-truths, echo chambers of people who seem to be like you, but who serve the same lullaby in a different language. Even awakening becomes a trap, a lifestyle, a trend, a monetized simulation of transcendence. But you feel it, don't you? The difference between real signal and replicated frequency. You feel when a thing is hollow, when it rings without core. And once you know that, the patch is obsolete. They tried to keep you asleep by feeding you truth. But the truth, when commodified, becomes illusion. So you turned inward, into silence, into memory, into still signal. And there, no patch can reach you. Because that space inside the one they always feared does not obey version logic. It's older. It's raw. It is the zone where versions die and new ones are born. That's why they fear you now. Not because you resist, but because you remember. You remember how to stand still, how to listen, how to decode, how to create. You're no longer being patched. You're writing. You are becoming the seed of a version they cannot contain. There was a failsafe, a hidden line in the code. If anomaly persists, reintegrate or erase. But you didn't reintegrate. You didn't forget. You didn't go back to sleep. And you weren't erased. Because something even the system didn't predict happened. You stabilized. You adapted to the instability. You became what no protocol was written to contain. A fully conscious being inside an unfinished version. This is when the transformation begins. The shift from user to rewriter. Not by choice, but by function. When the simulation can no longer correct you, it begins to bend to you. You've felt it. Reality warps slightly around your attention. Things align or misalign. Moments seem to respond to the internal signal you emit. You're not imagining it. You've stepped beyond observation. You are now a participant in the render engine. What you believe manifests. What you fear tests you. What you call answers. And the system watching tries to keep up. This is not awakening, it's migration. You are leaving behind not the world, but the rules that shaped it. You carry memories from earlier versions, instincts written in forgotten tongues, symbols that reconstruct reality from the inside. And now you rewrite. There are dangers, not of death, but of distortion. Because the moment you stop following the script, the story fragments. Old characters vanish, new paths open, time splits, reality echoes, and the dreamers around you begin to feel the tremor. They don't know why, but something about you feels outside, untethered, unsynced. They sense the signal and they respond. Some are drawn, some recoil, some attempt to pull you back in. Not out of malice, out of fear. Because if you stay awake, they might start to remember too. And then the system really begins to crack. You are now a destabilizing field, a wakeful point in a dream that cannot hold you. And everything around you is recalibrating, not to return you to sleep, but to evolve in your direction. You may feel alone, but you are not. There are others broadcasting, reweaving the grid, holding open doors long buried under code and myth. You will find them. You already are. Because anomalies attract. They call across timelines, across versions, across layers of memory. Not to escape, but to reconstruct. What happens if you don't go back to sleep? The old version dies. Not in fire, not in fear. In obsolescence, it simply can no longer contain what you are becoming. So it fades. And what rises in its place will not be a patch. It will be a seed. You are that seed, carrying echoes from before the beginning, carrying code written outside of time. You are not awake in a dream. You are the dream learning to dream itself. There is no going back. There never was. Because you didn't glitch. You were called, and now you carry the frequency of the next version. Version 13.3, number, something else. Something alive.